Alright guys, thank you for coming to the show. Another Let's Chat About session. Let's go ahead and do some introductions. I was going to randomize the names, but we can just go in order again. So, Brasscoin, go ahead and give us your rundown. Brasscoin,
Hello?
not Brasscoin. Go ahead.
Yes, Brasscoin. That is me. I run a Nintendo-centered YouTube channel that primarily consists of Pokemon and Zelda content. Lately, the Zelda community has been showing a lot of love, so my channel's been heading in that direction, and I couldn't be more excited about it. I've loved doing Zelda theories for years, and I don't think I would actually meet people that thought my ideas were cool, but it's been wonderful to see that support, and I'm happy to be a part of this chat, so thanks for the invitation.
No problem. Next up is HMK. Nice to have you on the show. Thanks for coming here.
Thank you so much, Pixel, for the invitation. Hey guys, I'm HMK. I run a Nintendo/Square Enix. I mean, whatever you want to call it, channel. I focus a lot on The Legend of Zelda, Kingdom Hearts, Super Smash Brothers, but I focus a lot on Zelda. That's my favorite series of all time. I love to theorize, I love to speculate, I love to talk about the lore and all that stuff. So if you want me to talk your ear off on Zelda for like hours on end, I'm your guy.
Yeah, I'm a fan of your Kingdom Hearts stuff too. I've been thinking about doing some Square
What?
Enix things. But anyhow, go ahead, Nayru.
I just want to say I've only ever played Kingdom Hearts 2, but I have like a bare bones working of the lore, specifically because I catch all of HMK's Kingdom Hearts videos.
Ah, I see.
It's
Kingdom
me.
Hearts 2. Kingdom Hearts 2 is one of the best in my opinion. But anyhow, go ahead, Nayru.
My name is Nayru. You'll be surprised to learn, also a Legend of Zelda channel.
Yes.
I have a series known as Hyrule History, which is where I think most of my subscribers have come from, so most people know me for, where we basically take a topic in Legend of Zelda and treat it like a history lecture. But I haven't done one of those in quite a while because they are a lot of work. And more recently, we've been doing a lot of theory videos about Breath of the Wild 2. Not me making my own theories, just giving my thoughts on other people's theories that I've seen around the internet. Yeah, so if you like Zelda history or Breath of the Wild 2 theories, come on over.
Yeah, I saw that you recently did a collab with Brasscoin. That was pretty cool to see.
I sure did, yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
As for me, I'm Pixel Fusion Productions, or you can just call me Cornelius Belmont, whichever. Regardless, I make Zelda videos, of course. I've been doing a Let's Talk About series where I just do general theories about things, and this Let's Chat About series where I have big folks like you guys come on and we talk about meta concepts of the series, what's going on with Nintendo, things like that. Go ahead, Zelda Lore.
Well, hi, my name is Zeldalore, and I have a channel centered exclusively on the Legend of Zelda, and I do videos about, well, specifically the lore of the series, and like characters, locations, enemies, or anything. And I also do the occasional theories where I cover very interesting topics that I find. So it's a mix between lore and theory videos.
All right. I do want to let the viewers know that Dr. Wily may be joining us late. Regardless, let's start with the topics. So this time we are talking about the Zonai. And just going down the top, let's ask, what is your favorite Zonai ruin or site in Breath of the Wild? Go ahead, Brasscoin.
All right, I get to go first. That means my site's not going to get taken. So my favorite Zonai site in Breath of the Wild is I'm going to slaughter the name, the 2 Como Shrine up in the Hebra region, and the Gihara Shrine in that same region. They're kind of in a line with each other. I guess 2 points always make a line. But as I thought about this prompt, for this discussion, the realization hit me that sometimes it isn't what we find in an area that stands out as important, it's what we don't find in other areas, right?
Sure.
So the Zonai are believed to have been worshipping the thunder dragon Farash way off in the Faerun region, but here we have a Zonai door built up as the entrance to a giant cave secreting away a giant Leviathan on the opposite side of the map in a very difficult area to get to. Severe temperatures withstanding. Like it's really cold. It would be hard to build in their current getup that we see with the barbarian armor, if that's really theirs. But what stands out to me with it is that there are 3 other places where dragon bones can be found throughout Hyrule, 2 of which are actually the Leviathans as well. But these ones are found in places that are a lot easier to get to, yet their remains aren't protected from the elements as much as the Ice Leviathan is. So, with the Zonai's affinity towards lightning and wind, it would make sense to me for them to have built it around the remains of the Leviathan in the Akala region that, actually looks like it could have been Levias himself. And I want to know who this Ice Leviathan is, and it's just very intriguing to me. Mass Nintendo Bandit and Monster Maze took a stab at it a while back in one of their videos. It was a great theory, but I want to know who this Leviathan could have been and why the Zonai felt the need to seclude it and protect it with a giant door.
Yeah, and it may not be that the giant door was created by the Zonai itself there, because if it is, then that giant door is, well, thousands of years old, and that quickly starts to make you wonder how such a thing could stand up like that. But
Yeah,
not sure.
absolutely.
What do you guys think about this ruin that Brasscoin has brought up?
I just think that, having anything protected, especially like the giant bones of a beast like that, has to have some sort of like, importance to it, whereas like, oh, who's possibly looking for these bones? And then why, hide the bones in the first place? Are we hiding the knowledge of the bones? Do they have some sort of like mystical properties that in the wrong hands could be, definitely, uh bad? And I've been playing around with like a theory in my head, thinking about, what if these Leviathans were still around, considering that the Calamity not only was able to take over with Malice, the Guardians, these inorganic, mechanized beings, but they were still able to corrupt living beings such as Nadra. And imagine if, the mouse were to get to any of these bones. We've seen the 3 Leviathans, they're spread across all of Hyrule. We've seen one in the desert. We've seen one in the north in the Elden region. And of course, we see these bones like blocked by a giant door or a slab or whatever you want to call it. Can you imagine if the mouse were to reach any of these and, possibly reanimate these gigantic beings? Because, I mean, that's not out of the question. We've seen cursed
Sure.
bokoblins, cursed Lizalfos that are basically, stall Lizalfos, stall bokoblins and stuff. They're just cursed, that they're living, breathing skeletons at this point. Imagine if that was applied to these bones. So that kind of begs the question, did they see something like this coming? Did the Zonai see something like this coming? The Great Calamity, and they wanted to make sure that like an entity like this would not be used for the wrong purpose, and that's why they decided to like, okay, the bones in the desert, that's fine. The mouse will never reach there because I mean it's the desert, nothing lives there. The Elden region, it's way too like the region is too harsh, too rough. The mouse will never reach there either, and it kind of never did. But in the ice region, the mouse still can reach there because we've seen mouse in like all over Nadra at the top of Mount Nayru. Imagine if it made it to these bones. I guess that's like my piece on like why they would decide to block it with a slab or a door.
Sure, and trying to protect it, whether the whoever built this, I'm not going to say specifically that it was the Zonai. It could have been any group that happened to live there, but it's very possible that whoever did it worshipped this creature, or maybe the creature just went there to die. I mean, maybe it crawled up through that body of water. Don't really know how deep that is. But, okay. How about you, HMK? What is your favorite Zonai ruin?
when it comes to my favorite, I have like kind of two, and I'm gonna use my number one because I don't want to say the number two one, like just in case if anyone else is gonna say that, because I feel it's like a a really popular pick. But my number one has to be the Thyphlo Ruins to the north of Hyrule. Only because there's a large concentration of Zonai ruins in that area, and it's so far off where we could come to expect the Zonai ruins to be, because usually they're most of them are in the Faron region. We've seen some scattered all over Hyrule. We've seen some of them in the Thundera Plateau and whatnot. But the Thyphlo ruins is so far, so secluded, and at the same time so concentrated. It just really makes you wonder how much of a reach the Zonai truly had all over this grand scale of Hyrule that we see in Breath of the Wild. The largest imagining of Hyrule. And why is it covered in a perpetual darkness? Because I don't know about y'all, but that ain't natural. So that really begs the question on how far their reach is, who's trying to cover this up, and it just begs the question like, do we our understanding of the Zonai when it comes to them being savage but also powerful magic users, that doesn't go hand in hand for me. Something is trying to be covered up in terms of the lore and like in actuality when we go to a physical place like the Thyphlo Ruins. And that's my favorite, honestly, because of that.
So I was actually going to pick the Thyphlo Ruins, but I have a secondary one. I hope doesn't get shot down. But
Sorry about that.
it's my personal favorite because of the darkness effect. I think that it is a very unusual effect, as you point out, but it gives a lot of really dramatic lighting. Running around there with just a torch or whatever I think it's very, very cool looking. I like Vah Rudania for very similar reasons because of the entire dark section in it.
Something that I noticed about the Thyphlo Ruins is that if you map out the progression of the owl statues around the darkness into the actual shrine itself,
Yeah.
and kind of map that to the progression through the Korok forest towards the Master Sword, they have a striking similarity. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio by any means, but it does follow a very similar pattern. And I thought that was a cool connection. It's almost like they could have been setting up this as a trial to try to make it through the forest in a more safer environment, so to speak.
That's a really interesting connection you bring up.
I like that.
But with the Thyphlo Ruins, like, because it's a Zonai ruin, it's got to be thousands and thousands of years old. I kind of get the impression that the Korok Forest is a bit more recent, or at least the current layout of the Korok Forest is more recent. But maybe.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
How about you, Zelda lore or Nayru? Any thoughts on Thyphlo Ruins?
Well, I was gonna choose this one too as my favorite
It's
location.
probably the most favored.
Yeah, I really like it. Not only how it looks, but it's just this whole mystery around it. There's like actually I'm gonna send some screenshots because I explored the area without the darkness, and there's a lot of really interesting
Right, I
things.
remember your video on that. It was a real interesting look. Go ahead.
I'm gonna send it in the August 31st chat. Without the darkness, actually even more beautiful because you actually get to see the entire ruins, and there's a lot of really, really cool stuff in it.
I'm sure the
But
viewers.
what I really see, for example, the first picture, it has like a lot of boars surrounding a single luminous stone, and it makes you wonder, like, why do they build it like that exactly? You know?
Yeah, it does beg the question of, if we assume that the civilization built this ruin with their architecture in mind and not as a darkness puzzle made by Nintendo, why would they build it this way? What type of majestic beauty were they putting in mind with all of this?
Maybe some sort of like a sacred place for the Zonai or something like that. Like a ritualistic place or something, because it's really similar to the actual Zonai ruins in Faron, if you compare them.
Well, a lot of the same art assets were used, so that's to be expected.
Yeah, but I mean, the structure in a way. Actually, the Thyphlo Ruins is looks more like a central hub than the actual Zonai Ruins. Kind of looks like a city in a way.
Yeah. So I performed an experiment. I'm going to go on a very small tangent really quick. I did a project where I brought Blue Flame from Akala all the way to Thyphlo Ruins with the intent
Whoa.
of lighting it up with blue flames. And it was a trial. I had to take the back way around Death Mountain to avoid rain. But I eventually got there and I lit one of the owl statues and it lit up with orange light. And I was so disappointed. Like I went through all that effort. It was just ugh. Did you have an opinion, Nayru, on Thyphlo Ruins?
You'll probably be not surprised to learn that no, I don't really have an opinion.
Well then, Nayru, what is your favorite rune, if you have one at all?
Okay, so first I need to consult with the Zonai experts. The Lome and the Zonai are the same thing, right?
I believe so.
Debated.
Okay, well we're gonna go with the working assumption that they are the same thing.
That they're connected, but there I've seen theories that one steals from the other and that they're loosely connected and that they're like the main consensus I've been seeing that don't agree that they're the same say that it's another situation with the Sheikah and the Yuga where they kind of start out the same and then they kind of split across from each other where like they went the Lomai went their separate ways and the Zonai went their separate ways and then they made the Labyrinths and yada yada yada. But
So-
I mean, their architecture is basically almost identical.
So I was walking into this with the assumption they are the same. And I actually didn't realize that there was a split community going on about like, are they two different? I just assumed.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people that say that they're. I've seen a lot of people say they are the same, and I've seen a lot of people say they aren't the same. And that why would Nintendo go out of their way to specify Lomai and like have both words Lomai and Zonai in the game? That's their argument.
So
I believe they're the same, but yeah.
That's a fair argument regarding it. But it's just not something that had occurred to me. I just assumed, oh, it's one of those ancient civilization ruins. And I've been assuming that the barbarian armor is also related to the Zonai. It's a relic from their civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Go ahead, Nayru.
Okay, so my favorite set of ruins is the Labyrinths. I don't have a particular favorite, but yeah, the reason that I love the Lome Labyrinths is because of what that means for the civilizations that built them. Because you can go two ways with it. You can go with what labyrinths mean in mythology. And in mythology, labyrinths are usually built to keep something imprisoned, which could obviously mean a lot of pretty interesting things. But then in the real world, what it means for an ancient civilization to have successfully built a labyrinth is that they were extremely successful. Those are the kinds of things that you build if you have a lot of excess wealth and labor available to you, because you're not going to be building a labyrinth if you're needing to be building housing for your civilians or something like that. So the fact that those giant labyrinths exist either means that the Zonai were doing well enough as an ancient civilization that they had the ability to build them, which means they were probably closer to like a Greece or a Rome than they were a group of barbarians, or it means that they built it to try and keep something imprisoned, which is pretty interesting to think about in its own right. So that's why I like the labyrinths.
You raise a good point about that. The architecture involved, it's massive. And if we look at our own civilization here, on Earth, some of the most massive things we've ever built might not even compare to the things we see in these fantasy settings. It is worth noting that the Zonai were powerful magic users, so that could have aided in the construction of massive monuments like this, but again, we don't have any real answers about it. So your idea that the labyrinths were built to hide something, I really like that concept. It's a good idea. I doubt they're ever going to do anything with that. But I am reminded how the one in Akala, it has that big massive room under it with all the decayed guardians. I'd like some information on that, Nintendo, if you're listening.
Makes you wonder, because looking to the sequel, these locations that are basically built for the shrines, are they going to be there in the sequel? Or are they going to have any importance, or are they going to remove them entirely? Because I've seen already for Korok puzzles and stuff that they already removed like environmental things related to the Korok puzzles. For example, like in the trailer when we see the shot of the castle floating, there's a log in Breath of the Wild, the first Breath of the Wild, that's related to a Korok puzzle, and the sequel is completely gone. So it makes you wonder if they're going to keep them there and give them another purpose, that it's not for the shrines, or if they're going to remove the labyrinths entirely.
Well, when it comes to Koroks, I imagine that they are not such a permanent facet of the land. The creatures probably
Yeah.
move around and, get bored. As for
Yeah,
structures,
imagine the structures that are related to the Koroks, they are created by the Koroks, like a sort of illusions or something like that.
yeah, could be. I was going to say, though, that in regards to the Sheikah shrines being embedded into Zonai architecture, I sort of assumed, or mentally headcanoned, that they built their shrine into an ancient civilization's location. That
Yeah, I agree.
10,000 years ago, the Sheikah built their shrines and just repurposed some of the old architecture.
Yeah, I agree too with that.
Before I accidentally steal whatever one you picked, go ahead and go first, Zelda lore. Which Zonai rune do you like the best?
I kind of already answered this, talking
Yeah.
about the Thyphlo Ruins.
It's a popular one.
Yeah, I absolutely adore it. And to go back to what HMK said before with in the darkness,
Yeah.
I actually have I theorized about this ages ago when I did a video talking about the Zonai a little bit in depth, and I actually tie the Zonai to the interlopers like really, really, really extensively, and I believe that the Thyphlo Ruins is actually the location where the interlopers, aka the Zonai, created the fused shadow. That the darkness would be like a residue of when they created the fused shadow, or that the fused shadow created the darkness or something. But I do believe that it's in a way related to that. Like
That's a real interesting concept. Anyhow, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, that was basically
That was
it.
it. Okay. All right. So for me, the one that I like the most is actually, well, it was Thyphlo Ruins first, but my backup is the Shrine of Courage down in the Nikluda region.
That was the second one I was gonna choose, so that's why I didn't say it. I was like, someone's probably gonna choose the Spring of Courage. That's why I'm like, I didn't.
The Spring of Courage, the reason why it calls out to me first is because it's very clearly a reference to Skyward Sword. I mean, the three shrines themselves are. And
Yeah, the
so
springs.
seeing how we saw that shrine in a different state in Skyward Sword, and now in Breath of the Wild we see it again, but with the added architecture from the Zonai on top of it, it sort of pins down that the Zonai had to come into existence after the events of Skyward Sword.
Are you saying that the Spring of Courage is the one from the Skyview Temple? Are you saying?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I
I
definitely believe it's
I
the Skyview.
I disagree with that. I
Okay.
think that the Spring of Power is the Skyview
Skyview.
Spring.
All right, I will confess that I have not actually played through Skyward Sword yet, even though I own it and have all the trinkets to go along with it. I've been distracted over the last month.
I'm telling you, man, it's an amazing game. It's so good.
Yeah, I played it like a decade ago when it came out and loved it. And I rewatched all the cutscenes more recently when I became a Zelda tuber.
One thing I do want to add on to what Zelda Lore said about the Spring of Courage and the possibility of it being one of the springs, either the Earth Spring or the Skyview Spring. I actually was playing around with a theory not too long ago where I would agree that the Spring of Courage is actually neither of the springs that we see in Skyward Sword, because we only see two. And my theory is that when Zelda, spoiler alert, sorry,
It's fine.
states that when Zelda states that she went to the springs in order to reawaken her, her godly memories as, the goddess Hylia. She said, "After I went to them all," and I'm like, why say it like that? Just say, I went to both of them, or I went to the two springs. Like, why them all? It makes me wonder that there was always meant to be a third spring. It's just that at the point of in time during Link's adventure, he did not make contact with Zelda or Impa at the moment they went to this third spring. And that, it makes a lot more sense to have, a spring of courage, wisdom, power, the three virtues of the Triforce. And then, of course, we have the idea of, the sky, land, the Skyview Spring and the Earth Spring. There might be like a spring of the sea, the third element of what binds the world together and whatnot. And that's why I'm like, maybe that's that hidden spring, because in the lore of the Zonai, when they are talking about how they worship, or they build these giant statues of animals, one of them they specifically like to worship in the Spring of Courage is a water dragon, and symbolizing how important water is to that area and possibly to the Zonai themselves. And then that could have been that third spring, that third unknown spring that Zelda and Impa went to, but Link did not come into contact at his point during that adventure. So that has the three virtues: courage, power, wisdom, along with the three thing binding the world together, which is sky, land, and sea. And that's my piece, now that Zelda brought that up.
That's an interesting concept as well. I had been assuming that the shrines we see in Breath of the Wild are the same springs that were talked about in Skyward Sword. And to me, because I had played Skyward Sword before playing Breath of the Wild, it very much felt like Breath of the Wild was based around concepts set up in Skyward Sword. The developers have outright said that now, but just things. There were a lot of similarities that came through to me, so I assumed early on, yeah, these are supposed to be the same places, even if it didn't really match up well with a timeline.
Oh yeah, they're almost exactly identical to the way they appear in Skyward Sword. Along with what HMK was saying, I found it really odd that Zelda would only have to visit two, while Link had to obtain three flames and had to do four spiritual trials. It just didn't seem to add up equally to the same end goal of both being balanced people and spiritually enlightened, powerful, and courageous. So
Yeah,
it makes sense that there'd be three.
and it's not the first time in a Zelda game that we've seen cut content. There was an entire dungeon stripped out of Wind Waker because they just didn't have the time to make it. So maybe in Skyward Sword there was going to be another dungeon. Maybe they thought the game was too long as it was. A lot of that we simply don't have answers to. Let's move on to the topic I know Nayru's more interested in, which is, how do you feel the Zonai Discourse has affected the Zelda community?
This is gonna be hilarious.
So, anybody want to go first, or should we just go down the list again?
I think going down the list is good.
All right, Brasscoin.
All right. Well, for the Zonai discourse affecting the Zelda community, I had talked about it in the getting ready for this chat with you prior to this,
Mhm.
but just growing up in the era that the Ocarina of Time took precedence over, the biggest debate was usually the placement of the games in the imaginary timeline. And while that's still a big thing,
Oh, that was such a fun
Oh,
time
yeah.
back in the day.
it was.
Whoa.
Zelda
Like
Linearist. Oh, yeah.
everybody was going crazy. I made a few of those theories myself, and I was thrilled when Nintendo gave us an official timeline. But I think the Zonai debate has superseded those earlier debates in matters of importance by a landslide. Like,
You think
while it's
so?
cool to, I think so. Like, it's cool to have a timeline, but like the Zonai has and continues to provide extensive room for theories, debates, ideas, and discussions. It just boggles my mind that a tribe that very little is known about has sparked such endless possibilities.
Yep. It's definitely a good sign showing just how much Breath of the Wild has brought new people into the Zelda community.
Oh, absolutely.
Unfortunately, some of those people won't go back and play the old quote unquote hard games, but yeah.
And I think it's shown Nintendo like what they can do to liven up the series and keep it talked about for years. Like Nintendo, I think, will key in on the hype and buzz these discussions have generated and model future games after that sense of mystery to continue discussion so that the series and these discussions will sell their games for them. Like this is really one of the most talked about games that I've seen since Ocarina of Time.
Many YouTubers have started their careers based entirely off Breath of the Wild. So yeah, it's a testament. How about you, HMK? What is your thoughts about the Zonai effect on the discourse?
We were speaking about this earlier before we started the recording, but I feel like the whole Zonai discourse within the Zelda community is like it's really funny because you have like every type of idea under the Tuscan sun about how the theories should run when it comes to the Zonai, lore, and if we should even theorize on the Zonai to begin with. And it's funny because I've seen a lot of people getting tired and like mad or have one thing to say or another when theorizing the Zonai. It's like, oh, we don't know nothing. Why are we theorizing? I'm like, that's kind of the point because we don't know anything, and that they want to claim that Nintendo doesn't like when we talk about, which is also untrue because they love it when we theorize. It's like making theories on such unknown concepts like this creates conversation. Conversation creates buzz. Buzz creates dollars for Nintendo, like all the way back at the end of the day. And considering how quote unquote important the Zonai has become within the Zelda community, it has only become even bigger thanks to creating a champion because they have a whole chapter dedicated to the Zonai. So I mean, if Nintendo or anyone else for that matter, or the game itself, Breath of the Wild, in which the Zonai was pretty much a footnote in the game itself, if they didn't want us talking about the whole concept of this unknown tribe, they wouldn't have slammed that gigantic piece in that book. Because there's an extensive amount of pseudo lore when it comes to the Zonai in creating a champion, in
Yeah.
which we can, derive from, make connections to, especially from what we see in Breath of the Wild, and even Breath of the Wild too. And that kind of like begs the question if we're gonna see more of this, or we're gonna be able to make connections from past Zelda games going into Breath of the Wild, Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, all of those games. But I just feel that the discourse, like at the end of the day, is just really funny considering how people apply this knowledge of the Zonai and how people consume the knowledge of the Zonai. And I just want to see, I love talking about it. I love seeing people talk about it. I love, watching videos of other Zelda content creators on their pieces, their thoughts on the Zonai and stuff because it's such a tantalizing mystery. So that's my piece on the discourse.
Well, that's good to hear. I will go ahead and overlay some of the creating a champion book when you were talking about that for the video, so the viewers can see just how much it's talked about in creating a champion. What are your thoughts, Nayru?
Well, so first, I kind of want to add on to something that HMK said,
Sure.
where he was saying that people complain about or people say that Nintendo doesn't want us theorizing it when that's so obviously not true. And it's like easily provable way to show that Nintendo loves it when we theorize is the fact that Aonuma is on record about the fact that the main reason they waited so long to add Breath of the Wild to the timeline, and the reason that it has a really vague placement currently, is specifically because he loves seeing us talk about where in the timeline it falls. And that's the reason they waited so long to make a timeline period, is because Nintendo gets a big kick out of us theorizing about all that stuff. So whenever somebody says that Nintendo doesn't want us theorizing about it, that's ridiculous. Nintendo loves it when we do that stuff. So that has nothing to do with Zonai. I agree with HMK on that.
Well, I hope that Mr. Aonuma is listening to my show. If you're there,
And hey,
thank you.
if we can write it for him, why not let us, right?
Yeah, exactly. As for the question, the impact on the Zelda community discourse that the Zonai have had, I'm in sort of two minds about it. So I personally, I don't really care about the Zonai. I never really have. The the fantasy trope of the ancient civilization is existent in almost every single fantasy property, and it is always tough for me to get invested in the trope. And I think maybe it has something to do with the fact that that's what I spend all my time at school doing is learning about ancient civilizations. So when I get to fantasy, it's the last thing I want to do. But so personally, I don't really care about them, and I'm not a monster. I love myself a good Nintendo Black Crisis documentary about it as much as the next guy. But I haven't made a single video about the Zonai. I don't think I've mentioned them because it's just discourse that doesn't really interest me. And I do think there are some negatives to the Zonai being so overwhelming in the discourse right now. Primarily, that being every time you have any sort of theory about Breath of the Wild, pretty much regardless of what it is, you have people trying to tell you that the Zonai is the answer, even if it doesn't really make sense. And that is definitely pretty exhausting. But the flip side is that, like everybody has said so far, we are experiencing a resurgence in like hardcore Zelda theorization that I don't think that we've really experienced for quite a long time. Because even in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword and Wind Waker, Twilight Princess less so because there's a lot of stuff with the interlopers that got pretty crazy. But all that kind of stuff, all those games, I don't think they brought up topics that got discussed nearly as much as the Zonai do. And I think I would probably agree that the topic to get the most discussion last would probably be the time split. And the our us older millennials probably have vivid memories of spending our youths on the Nintendo insider forums on the Zelda board arguing about the timeline split. And I think it's really healthy for the community to have that kind of discussion. The Legend of Zelda community has been right up there with Dark Souls in terms of the depth of the lore community, and how vibrant discussion of the lore is. And I think even if they aren't topics that I'm personally interested in, like the Zonai certainly are not, we need those kind of topics that really, really make people talk, even if it's just them talking about how much they hate it. It's conversation, right? And conversation is what keeps the games in everybody's minds. So I do think there is some negatives that come with the Zonai being the main thing, in the sense that it sort of gobbles up all other Breath of the Wild conversation without meaning to. But overall, it is a tremendous boon to Zelda discourse. And that's what I think.
That sounds like a good way for me to segue in, because I have a lot of similar views to you. Well, I've noticed just about everything I seem to agree with you on from your videos. But yes, I agree that the Zonai discourse, it's sometimes annoying. People like to bring it up a lot. But generally, it is helpful to the community. It keeps the conversation going.
Yeah.
I haven't had too many arguments on my channel yet. I'm still kind of a small guy. But every now and then, some people do bring up the Zonai in my comments, and I groan a little, but I give a response. The only time I've done a video talking about them extensively was right after Breath of the Wild 2's trailer dropped, and I brought up the idea of, oh, what if the Zonai went to the sky? For the Discourse itself, I'm torn. I'm tired of people bringing up Zonai swirls and acting like it's a big thing. But at the same time, it's hard to tell what's intentional and what was decoration going into the creation of Breath of the Wild.
Well, the Zonai swirl thing, like, kind of like how before the podcast started and we were talking, I mentioned that the Zonai discussion is only really replacing the discussion that happened about the interlopers, and the interloper discussion was only really replacing the discussion that was happening about things before it. Like, there has always been that one sort of secretive group that everybody tries to tie everything to in the Zelda lore. And it's just the Zonai now, so it's always kind of replaced. It's just replacing what was previous, and it's the exact same with the Zonai swirl. Yeah, it's pretty exhausting seeing people look at their latte in the morning swirled with a spoon and be like, "Oh, this is a Zonai latte." But before the Zonai, it was the exact same with the Sheikah Eye. You had everybody look at anything that had a vaguely eyeball shape in the games and be like, "Oh, was this tied to the Sheikah?" And in a lot of cases it led to some pretty interesting discoveries, but in other cases it just was two vaguely arched shapes things on top of each other that obviously didn't have anything to do with the Sheikah. And it's the exact same with the Zonai swirl now. So while I agree that the Zonai swirl discussion is very annoying, sometimes it's also nothing new for the Zelda community.
I wish
Y'all
I had
remember
that.
like 2009, 2010, right?
Yeah, way in the
Va-
before times.
Yeah,
Vaguely.
vaguely. It's been a while. So like, I feel like the Zonai in the Zelda community is like the meme of Illuminati confirmed. You see that swirl and like Zonai, Illuminati confirmed, and just it was a whole
Absolutely.
thing.
What are your thoughts on the Discourse Zelda lore?
I think that it has impacted the discourse quite a bit. I mean, look at YouTube alone, and you see
Uh-huh.
virtually nearly all of the big channels and even small channels talk about the Sona in one way or another. I mean, in my channel alone, I made one video about the Sona. It's my most viewed video on my entire channel, which is nuts.
People are
So
thirsty for it. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. The mystery behind them, I think, is what draws people in, because people want to know who they are, and the fact that we don't know practically nothing about them except for a few things on the books and on the game. But there's also this, connections to other mysterious tribes that mysteriously disappear, like the Zonai or the tribe that created Majora's Mask, and people wanting to try and tie them together, and the symbolism of the Zonai being found, for example, in Nayru Desert in Skyward Sword as well. There's a lot of things that people start to theorize, and theorizing is fun at the end of the day. I really enjoy theorizing, especially about the Zonai. And it's trying to figure out and seeing if in the end you're going to be right or wrong with these theories. It's the engagement that's it's a lot of fun,
I
and sharing your ideas.
I fully agree with you. There's a really great theory or not theory. There's a really great feeling when you put a bunch of effort into theorizing and then it finally gets confirmed and you're like, yes, I
Yeah.
called that months ago, years ago, whatever. Like, I used to really get into that with TV shows when I watched a lot of them. So I fully understand where you're coming from. I've
and
become more.
with the Sonai,
Go ahead.
and with the Sonai specifically, the theories, like for example, look at the video that Nintendo Black Crisis made, which is basically a compilation of ideas that Larulian Historian and a lot of other theories made. The connections between all of the games, it's remarkable, and it's even with Twilight Princess, which I personally think that Breath of the Wild is like a continuation in the
Same.
timeline of Twilight Princess. Um, But that's a completely different topic. But
We talked about that some last time. Go ahead.
yeah, but the connections, for example, in Twilight Princess, there's like in Faron, there's like ruins of like a tribal, like a tribe that we don't know nothing about in Faron. That kind of looks tribal, and it kind of reminds you of the Zonai in a way. And you know, they're both in Faron, and it has ties to the Twilight, like in symbolism and the way that some walls are built, that they share the same textures with the Palace of Twilight. So you kind of make that connection, and then the Twilight had connections to the Uka as well in symbolism. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you kind of tie together, and then with Skyward Sword as well, with symbolism as well. So there's a really, really, really cool stuff there, which that's what I really enjoy.
And like I said before, it's hard to tell where artistic direction and the intentional inclusion of lore ends at some points. Sometimes there were direct connections made. I very much feel, and you said you disagree with me some, that the shrines were meant to be directly connected. I think the sealed temple, or the underground temple in Breath of the Wild is
The Forgotten Temple?
Yeah, is supposed to be the goddess shrine that fell from the sky at the end of Skyward Sword.
I believe that it's the Great Plateau, because well, we're told this in Hyrule Historia that Rauru created the Temple of Time over the ruins of the Steel Temple. And if you actually get the map of Skyward Sword, actually let me get the map and paste it in the chat so we can actually see it.
Sure.
Skyward Sword map. If you compare the map of Breath of the Wild to Skyward Sword, the layout of the locations actually matches pretty exactly. Let me get Breath of the Wild 2.
So when it comes to map comparisons like this, I feel it quickly starts to break down if you look at how it is inconsistent throughout the other games. I think Croton was doing a set of videos where he was trying to go over all of the geography.
I plan on doing a video like comparing all the maps to Breath of the Wild, because there's a lot I want to talk about that. Wily is here in the chat.
Wily just joined. Awesome. Just a moment.
And while we were on the topic of all of the maps and whatnot, I think it's interesting to talk about how the Legend of Zelda is
too late.
Hey, Dr. Wily, we were just finishing up the second question. Go ahead.
Hey, Wily.
Go ahead and Brasscoin. Finish your thought.
Oh, yeah. So it's interesting to think that we're playing the game from an outside perspective. It's called The Legend of Zelda, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're playing the game and we're showing how it progresses, how the story completes. But I think a lot of people miss that it's more important the events that happen, and somewhat the order in which they happen, of course. But the location is, for a large part, irrelevant. Like, that's just the filler. That's how we know where things happened, but the maps not being detailed, not being matching up, it's in the perspective of the storyteller. One may say he went towards the river, while another thinks that you said he went north towards the river. Another might think you said he went south towards the river. Like, the locations and their proximity to other things is kind of a back burner idea, as opposed to the story that gets told and the events that actually happen, the actual lore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just leaving things as sort of a vague mythical era, and I know that's what they're trying to do with the history of Breath of the Wild. We talked about that a bit in the last episode, but trying to just sort of excuse it all as an incoherent legend kind of gets under my skin. But
yeah,
if that's the direction they're going, who am I to argue? I'm not a.
Well,
I'm not
now that we have like an open world map, like the official quote unquote map of Hyrule, because I doubt they're gonna like change the layout of the map and, for example, put Death Mountain on the south. You know,
I'm not so sure about that. Go ahead.
No, I think that they're gonna keep the layout of Hyrule, and what I would like to Nintendo to do is go back, for example, to Ocarina of Time and reimagine it in the Breath of the Wild engine, and use the map of Breath of the Wild, but change the geography to show the time of Ocarina of Time. For example, have a really smaller Lake Hylia and have the shape of Lake Hylia from Ocarina of Time. Show the landmarks of Ocarina of Time, how they were in that time, and sort of like that. And for Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, the same sort of thing.
Sure.
Like reimagine the games in the Breath of the Wild engine, with the voice actors, really fleshed out animations and cinematics, and like expand the story even more. That's something I really would like to see
Okay.
using the
Well,
same map.
Dr. Wily has joined us, so I'd like to get his introduction. Thank you again for joining us, for coming back to the show. Go ahead, Dr. Wily, tell us about yourself a little.
Well, first of all, sorry that I'm late.
It's all right.
I kind of forgot because I am a dummy, as they would say. Um, Aside from that, I make epic videos on Zelda adventures. I make really good stuff now, way better than I used to.
Good to
So
know.
that's kind of it.
So we were just talking about how the Zonai have affected the Zelda discourse, the community overall. I am very curious as to your feelings on this.
Well, I mean, we never like the Zonai were never something we talked about like in the past until Breath of the Wild 2 kind of came around the corner. Before that, like during Breath of the Wild 1, there was some vague whispers here and there, but when Breath of the Wild 2 came into the picture, then everybody started to completely go crazy for them. And I think we've kind of gotten to the point where we're so infatuated with them that we're maybe even blinded by it all. A lot of people like to explain literally everything that could possibly happen with insert Zonai. I don't really agree with that, but I bet they will play a bigger role in the next game. I'm not exactly sure what, but yeah, I mean, it's all vague as all hell, so in the
Yeah.
end, I can make the wildest predictions ever, but as I have seen myself back in the day with the first Breath of the Wild game, I will most likely be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I do hope that the new arm that we see in that trailer is Zonai technology. I think it would be cool. But I'm not holding my breath. For all we know, the Zonai will never be talked about again.
I think that the major thing to hope for, and because this is something that we've seen happen already, is the main thing to hope for is that people don't get so tied and like emotionally attached to their own theories that they
Invested.
get upset and angry when their theories when and if their theories turn out to be not true. Because I see that happen all the time, and this doesn't really have to do with the theory, but like we've even seen it happen in Breath of the Wild when there were all those news stories talking about how Breath of the Wild Link was going to be a girl, and then obviously didn't turn out to be a girl, and then people were like legitimately upset about that fact. But I've seen that happen with theory stuff in other series as well. So I think that's the main thing, is hoping people don't get so tied up to their Zonai conspiracy theories that they are genuinely upset that they don't turn out to be true.
I don't think I've ever gotten like legitimately upset on a theory that I've crafted that it didn't come true. I mean, I would be like, oh, hee hee ha ha, it would have been a lot better if they went this way, but whatever. But I don't think I've ever gotten mad because, it's like, okay, it was not meant to be. Move on to the next theory.
Yeah, it's because getting mad at that your theory wasn't correct is a really silly thing to do, but there are a
Yeah.
lot of silly people out there. So
Yeah, I've noticed that it seems to happen a lot with younger people. I I've seen people delete like their Twitter accounts and Tumblr accounts over huge arguments over really stupid things about in fandom, Zelda being one of them. And I feel like as we get older, that's less of a problem. We can just accept that we're wrong on things.
Yeah. Well, actually, one example that I can sort of point of is Age of Calamity, not the ending plot twist, because I think there is some basis for people being genuinely upset with that.
I agree
But
Oh
with you.
man.
personally,
Okay.
I was fine with it. I love the plot twist, but I understand why people feel genuinely upset because of the false advertising aspect.
Mhm.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
All right, let me talk about that for just 1 second if you want to go on that tangent. I find it
Here we go.
funny that people got like Wiley. I showed you that meme I made a while back. That Twitter shit post that I made. Like I find it so funny that people are like legitimately mad over like the revelations of Age of Calamity when like all the signs were being pointed out, even with the advertising. When people were like, oh, it's false advertising. I'm like, like all they said was that experience the story of the war that happened 100 years before Breath of the Wild. Did they say it was canon? Did they say it was gonna be canon? They never said that. Even though it's kind of canon, but isn't. But I mean, I keep looking at them like, guys, this is a
Okay, wait.
Hyrule Warriors game. Come on, like.
Oh wait, this is the moment where I actually have to draw a gun.
No, let's go,
It's
let's
still
go.
the rock,
Yo,
paper,
bring
scissors
Dive in.
scenario.
No, bring it. Let's go.
Oh dear.
I
Oh, dear.
completely disagree with this. This is absolute. I can't swear. Darn it.
Wally, I will go to the site right now and read you what they say. It's so funny. Like,
Bro, I will
you know-
destroy you just like
No,
I
no, no,
destroyed
'cause-
you on many
So-
other things.
Oh please, man. What was I gonna say? Like all things considered, like it is like there's a Hyrule Warriors game. You know, when we come to the application of the previous Hyrule Warriors, I'm like, okay, is this gonna be canon? That's why I kept asking myself when I saw the trailer, and every time I see things, I'm like, is this gonna be canon? Like this, they're probably gonna pull some like funky stuff, right?
Oh,
And,
but hey, wait!
like-
now you're just giving me ammunition. You were even doubting if
Oh,
it was
yeah.
canon.
So
Dude, I doubted if it was
This
canon
is the
from
first game they
beginning.
actually connected to another Zelda game, so obviously it should be
No.
connected.
The
It's
fact,
canon.
the
Okay,
fact that it's a
guys,
Hyrule Warriors
guys.
game to begin with, but like it says here in the story, the story begins 100 years before the events of the Breath of the Wild game. There is no lie there. There is no lie there. That's it.
okay. Well, Age of Calamity and all the controversy that involves it aside, let's try to pull back to the actual topic, which is the wonderful, the wonderful divisive Zonai. The thing
Yeah,
that we all
they're-
love and hate. Go ahead.
The reason that I brought the Age of Calamity up, I'm sorry for what just happened, but that was,
alright.
that was fun to listen to. Was not because of the ending twist, which didn't bother me because I lived through Metal Gear Solid 2, so false advertising plot twists don't bother me. But it was with Astor, the villain. There were a lot of theories about Astor, about whether he's Yuga is the one in specific. Yuga from A Link Between
right.
Worlds. And I did see people genuinely upset that their theory about him being Yuga turned out to be false. Yeah, like people being genuinely bothered that it wasn't Yuga and it was actually just like a generic dude. And that's the thing that I hope people don't do with the Zonai, is I hope that they don't get so tied up in their theories that they are upset with Nintendo if they don't turn out to be true.
I mean,
Well,
me,
I mean,
go ahead, Wiley.
thanks. Well, I mean, that will probably happen, and that's also because of the phenomena where the people who are the loudest usually stand out the most. Doesn't mean they are the biggest group or whatever, but they just scream the loudest, and therefore it will look like there's a massive eruption if Breath of the Wild 2 comes around, and it is not related to the Zonai in the slightest, which would be surprising, but it would also be hilarious, to be honest. I kind of hope that, on the other hand, because that would just be very funny. If it has nothing to do with the Zonai at all, or very minimally, it would be very funny. But I think there's a high chance that, regardless of what happens, people will go nuts. Because they always go nuts. I mean, when Breath of the Wild came out, people also went nuts when certain theories or certain assumptions weren't true. Even the smallest and stupidest stuff. So...
That's true. Yeah, the vocal minority, I suppose it's called.
Yeah,
that's
like,
the word I
vocal
was
minority.
looking for.
Yeah.
Vocal minority. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the last question, which is, how do you think the Zonai will impact Breath of the Wild 2?
This is gonna be fun.
Go.
This is gonna be fun. Yeah.
It will be.
Can I go? Can I go first since I have the least to
Oh
say?
yeah, go ahead, Nayru.
The Zonai will be in Breath of the Wild 2.
Gasp.
Okay,
Dun,
no,
dun,
you can't.
dun.
No, you can't do that. That's no, Nayru, you can't do that because like they're using the same map. They're using the same map from Breath of the Wild 1, so that's basically a shoe. No. We need more than if they're gonna be in, it has to be more than what's already in. You get what I'm trying to say? Because that's
Oh, yeah.
that's a
I-
cop out.
I have no interesting answer.
Can I go after Nayru?
to give you. Yeah, Zelda lore will have a 50 times more interesting answer than me. So
We don't have to go in order. I mean, we can go in reverse order. That works. Go ahead, Zelda lore. What's your
Okay.
feelings?
I do think that they're gonna have like a really influential part in Breath of the Wild 2. That they're gonna. So what I think is that they are basically gonna be the Sheikah of this game. So all the Sheikah technology, all the Sheikah lore, and everything is gonna go like completely, and instead it's gonna be replaced with the Zonai stuff. So, for example, instead of having Sheikah Guardians, we're now gonna have Zonai Guardians, for example, or Zonai Shrines. So everything is gonna like revolve around the Zonai, and we've seen it in the trailers now. In the first one, we had the caverns with a lot of Zonai architecture and the Green Hand, which is now seen also in the second trailer with the green energy also powering this golem, which has a lot of symbolism with dragons, which ties to the Zonai. So I do think that the Zonai are gonna play an integral part in the story. How big? We don't know. Maybe it's gonna still be kind of a mystery. Are we gonna meet any Zonai spirits or actual people that are living in the clouds or something? We don't know yet, but maybe or maybe not.
Hmm.
So I do really think that it's gonna be Zonai centered.
So I've played with your idea before that they're just going to file off the same concepts that we see for the Sheikah. File off the serial numbers, stamp Zonai on it, and here we go, our sequel to our big game. 120 Zonai shrines in the sky. It's kind of cringeworthy to think about that they might do that. I really hope they don't.
Can I tag into that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, along with the Sheikah and the Zonai kind of being their own equivalent in each of the games, like, we can see in our own history, we were a lot more spiritually oriented back in the past with religion and all of that. And as we advanced as a society, a lot of people started going towards the more scientific things, and we see that in the Sheikah. So, like, I can understand what Zelda lore was saying with that, as far as the Zonai being the old method of doing things, and now that the Sheikah technology has proven ineffective at working, it's a rebound back into the more spiritual side of the world of Hyrule that we haven't seen in Breath of the Wild. Like, the three golden goddesses are virtually non-existent. Hylia is believed, but there was temples built up to everybody, and they went there. But I don't know. I just think it would be an interesting recourse back into the spiritual aspect that Hyrule had, and the Zonai are perfect for that. Like, their stuff looks like it could be operated on spirit power, so
Yeah,
it would be interesting to see that.
that's a really good thing. And from the impression from the Breath of the Wild 2 trailer, I absolutely got the feeling that everything in the sky is going to be like heavy Shinto themed, and there are hints of Buddhism to it as well. So
Yep.
it's very possible that when the civilization left the skies, say at the end of Skyward Sword, it started becoming more advanced and breaking away from that spirituality. But now that they're finally returning to the sky because they have to, we're going to get hints of how things have changed from the kingdom as opposed to what it used to be like. Probably maybe comparable to when you go to like Tokyo to Kyoto now, but I'm not actually Japanese, I don't know.
It's far. You have to take a bullet train. It's like 2 hours bullet train.
Let's see, Nayru gave his, Zalor gave his. How about you, HMK? What are your thoughts of the Zonai in Breath of the Wild 2? Go for it.
There's a really big possibility that the Zonai, like, besides what we know with creating a champion and the first Breath of the Wild game, that there could be no like hint or anything related to the Zonai in Breath of the Wild 2. And that's kind of like the dice roll a lot of people have to play with when it comes to theorizing about this aspect of Breath of the Wild. That a lot of people are really expecting them to be there. And sure, there's a lot of signs granted in both trailers when it comes to the architecture and the supposed connection of like the color green and the energy from what we see in the arm and the enemy that we see in the sky. But Nintendo could really just swerve us completely in saying that's something completely new, that's something related to a completely different aspect that we like. In the original interview, when it comes to designing the whole mystery about the Zonai, is that they want to present something to us that we are not going to know much about. And that's kind of like the tantalized thing of like, oh, here's an ancient civilization that died out long before the events of Breath of the Wild. So to show you that the world is a little bit more real, they don't have to explore that at all. But considering like the structures under the ground in the supposed temple that we're going to be, the supposed dungeon we're going to be in Breath of the Wild 2, and some of the architecture in the sky even kind of match up to what we see in the ruins of Breath of the Wild. There's a good chance that they could explore that a little bit more. And considering that, like I said earlier in this recording, that they put a huge chunk, like a whole chapter of Zonai in creating a champion, that kind of could be like Nintendo kind of give us the hint is like, hey, you should know a little bit about this before going into Breath of the Wild 2, because we're probably going to, dive a little deeper or even more deeper than what we could possibly fathom with Zonai from Breath of the Wild into Breath of the Wild 2. So I think there's a good chance that they could address it, but at the same time, this is Nintendo we're talking about. They love to bring up like new pieces of lore and then drop it completely the next game. So, it's that, coin flip in the air for, so to speak, for my piece.
Yeah. And like we've said before in this conversation, or at least I have, it's very possible there will be no Zonai at all in the upcoming game. I don't think that's going to be the case, but who knows? Dr. Wily, what do you think?
Well, I mean, knowing Nintendo, and I've known the bastards for quite some time now. It will I've met them.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah, they are my neighbors.
You're a
You are
Capcom
Nintendo.
villain.
I used to go to high school with Miyamoto. But personally, I expect them to show, but not tell. So we might see Zonai ruins, Zonai like monsters or like BMOs type creatures or machines, and like Zonai items, but I don't think we will actually see any Zonai. Maybe at best, in some sort of flashback cutscene, but I am 100% certain that we will not see like an actual Zonai or some crazy Zonai descendant, like it's some Sheikah stuff in the game. I don't think we will see that. But now comes the biggest revelation that it will drop on all of you. I will be wrong. Just like I was with Breath of the Wild 1.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we're going to get to see anything big like a representative of the race or anything. Maybe talk to a spirit or two, but I don't think there's going to be like 120 mummified Zonai priest ready to give us power-ups.
I mean,
as long as we have that 900 Korok seeds, we can still go and find scatter across the sky. Like, I'm game, right?
Yeah.
But now they fly.
No, it shouldn't be Korok seeds. It should be Oka eggs. There are
yes.
900 Oka eggs to find.
Those things are so creepy.
How about you, Brasscoin?
Actually had eggs?
I'm assuming they had eggs.
They're bird people.
very bird-like, I guess.
Maybe they have live birth.
Oh, we do not need to add to the horror of.
Only imagine that.
This.
All right. Well, with the Zonai and whatnot and how it impacts Breath of the Wild 2, in my mind, it's unclear to me whether that mysterious hand is going to be Zonai or some sort of Sheikah or something else entirely. But it's pretty obvious that the runes seem to be Zonai in nature that leads to, Mr. Crispy's chamber, if that is in fact Ganon.
Yeah.
I just call him Mr. Crispy. We don't know yet, but like I put out my own theory about the Zonai, as many of us have, like of how they may have been influential in that sealing and whatnot. But I think they'll be nonetheless pivotal to the continued story in a few potential ways. Like if the arm attachment follows some of the original concept art they had for Link, it's supposed to have different abilities, right? And those could be unlocked at some sort of ancient pedestal similar to the runes of the Sheikah Slate. But I hope for that representative of the Zonai tribe to be able to make modifications to it to allow you to progress through the game and kind of teach you how to use the arm to its potential in some way. I don't believe that we'll be going to the past. Like, I'm not on that train with the time travel just yet.
Yeah.
But I think a huge part of it will be discovering in some sort of a flashback the genocide that happened with the Zonai tribe. HMK was talking a little bit about it earlier, and like this is a warlike tribe, right? We've been told that, and we've been told that they're very strong magical users, which those two ideas don't exactly coincide, but they can. And a tribe like that isn't going to vanish from history without a trace for no reason. Like if they went down in a fight, which a war tribe likely would, it would be recorded. It would be talked about unless the winners didn't want it to be talked about.
Mhm.
You
Can I
know,
tag in on that one?
Go ahead.
I would also like to after Wily.
Okay. Wily
Yay!
first.
Everybody tags in.
Then.
Well, I bet that will be explained somehow, but again, show and not tell, just like they did, for example, with the Gerudo in Twilight Princess. Everybody knows that the Arbiter's Grounds were probably used as some sort of terrible place to slaughter all the Gerudos and imprison them and get rid of them, together with Ganon and anybody else that was inconvenient to the Empire. However, it is never, like, explicitly... Nobody explicitly tells us that that happened there, but everybody knows because there are enough clues. So I think they
Like
will
all
do
they
the
tell
same
us
with
is
the
that
Zonai.
something went down. Like something
Yeah,
went
yeah.
down. Yeah.
We don't exactly know what, but I think that will also be the case with the Zonai, because Nintendo doesn't like to play open cards. They want everybody to just figure it out and whatever, because then they can also... The reason why they do that, I think, is because they can, with later games, they can just do whatever and they can kind of bend the truth and bend the story a bit to fit the new narrative. So I don't think they will give us something like truly concrete. They rarely do that. I don't think it will be like an imprisoning war type event where the entire process of what happened is completely laid out and like chronological.
Yeah. Although it would be kind of neat that they took the Hyrule Warriors series and showed us the past of a Zonai conflict, just as an idea. You know, Miyamoto, I know you're listening to us. Nayru, you wanted to tag in.
Yeah,
I told them to listen.
I just wanted to oppose the idea that Brasscoin mentioned that warlike people would disappear from history without being like conquered or beaten in a fight. That isn't exactly true. There's quite a lot of real world warlike people that sort of just disappeared from history. Particularly a lot of plains people around the late Roman Empire just kind of faded out of history, and we have no idea what happened to them. So it isn't necessarily true that warlike people will 100% of the time die in a big fight. Sometimes they just kind of assimilate into other cultures and disappear that way.
Maybe they died
absolutely.
from a plague or
I will say
It's
that
it's just like the Romans on the other hand. For example, the Romans, they most likely died out because they the later emperors in the Roman Empire started messing around with grain reserves, and therefore they kind of starved themselves to death, and that affected the army, and so they got conquered by smaller groups, and the whole empire fell apart because like the management structure just went to absolute hell. So it doesn't have to be a war, yeah.
Mm.
It's actually a good point.
talking about
Yeah.
civilizations being conquered and wiped out, my most recent video with the Gerudo extinction, it had me, it's a bit of a bummer, but the idea that in the Fallen timeline that the Gerudo may have been outright wiped out because Ganondorf stole the royal family's relic. This is really reminding me of that. It's depressing.
You know, because honestly, when it comes to the disappearance of the Zonai and whatnot, and like the history that is supposedly written about them, because history is always written by the victors, it just makes us want to look at them in a bad light. And I feel that, you know, the Zonai themselves were a tribe that, like, their existence threatened the royal family. So much so to the point where they had to take, you know, quote unquote, action. And this is nothing new when it comes to like the dark history of the royal family. We've seen stuff applied from that when it comes to Twilight Princess's backstory, Ocarina of Time. When like literally, for those who don't know, you know, the Shadow Temple is literally their execution grounds that they hold in secret. That, you know, they send the Sheikah out in order to find, you know, traitors or even enemies to the royal family, or even people that, you know, the royal family feels like that's not a person I want to exist anymore. So, you know, the capacity for them doing something like this to a tribe that, you know, could be threatening, you know, their power or their whole, you know, idea of what could be a safe and, you know, solid control of over Hyrule when it comes to the royal family. It's not past them. And then when they do that, they will just write the narrative that, oh, you know, don't worry about the Zonai, they were savages. You know, it's completely possible.
It's
absolutely
also
is. Go ahead.
it's also completely possible to finish my thought, and along what with Nayru was saying, it's not always that they warlike tribe like this is executed or killed or defeated. In my theory on my channel, Nintendo Black Crisis also briefly mentions it in one of his videos as well, but self-sacrifice, using their magic for good, but Hyrule also not wanting to let everybody know that it happened as well, so they just vanished. I think a mass self-sacrifice to seal Ganon could be in play. That's something that I've theorized before. Could be completely off the wall and wrong, but
Could be.
yeah, just it's not always that they got defeated, but could have willingly went down.
Oh, I was just going to say they also could have just migrated, which is also a pretty common thing in real world history.
They can move past those invisible walls we can't get over.
Whoa! I have a new theory now. The Stone Tower Temple was built by the Zonai.
There you go.
Hell yeah!
They
All
just
right.
It's
built
Armenian
a,
Zonai.
they just built a really long wooden bridge to pass that impassable invisible wall.
Exactly.
You know, when the stone tower turns around, it turns in a what? Spiral?
Oh my god, you're right.
Holy cannoli, he gets it.
All right, guys. Is there any closing thoughts for this session?
I had a lot of fun.
That's good. I'm glad you did. In that case, let's go ahead and close this out. Thank you guys for coming, and I hope some of you guys will come back for next session.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.
No problem.
For sure, it
Absolutely,
was
this
a great
is so
time.
much fun.
If my brain works, then yes.
Thanks again.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, so thanks.
No problem.